October 1948. The valley fills like a bowl. Smoke sinks and refuses to lift. Morning comes, but the sun does not. Adults open doors and stop in place. Breathing feels heavy, like wet cloth. The air itself becomes the emergency. Donora sits along the Monongahela River in Pennsylvania. Hills rise on both sides, close enough to make the town feel held and trapped. For years, smoke has been part of the scenery. A zinc works and a steel and wire plant sit near the water. Stacks exhale day and night. On many days, the haze drifts away and the town keeps working. This week, it does not drift away. A lid forms over the valley. Warm air settles above colder air, and the wind goes quiet. The smoke does not rise. It spreads sideways, then folds back down. It mixes with fog, and the fog turns into a thick blanket that sits at street level. In the first hours, people think it will pass. They have seen fog before. They have smelled sulfur before. They have wiped soot from windowsills before. This feels like more of the same, only thicker. Then, the coughing starts. Not a polite cough. A deep cough that pulls at the chest. A cough that makes talking hard. Adults step outside and return inside quickly. A person walks to the corner store and has to stop, bent forward, hands on knees, trying to pull air into lungs that do not want it. In a small house, an older man sits in a chair and stares at the floor. His wife watches his breathing, counting without speaking. His lips look slightly darker than normal. He tries to stand, then sits again. The room smells like the outside, even with the windows shut. Down the street, a nurse leaves a clinic and heads toward a patient. The nurse ties a scarf tighter, but cloth does not filter this kind of air. Each breath tastes metallic, bitter, and sour. The nurse feels it scrape the throat. The nurse has cared for influenza patients and for pneumonia. This is different. This is the world itself, becoming hostile. By the second day, the valley is a tunnel. Visibility shrinks. Streetlights glow in the middle of the day, not because it is evening, but because the haze is thick enough to swallow daylight. Cars creep forward with horns, used like signals. Adults hold handkerchiefs to their mouths. A man steps off a curb and disappears into gray, seen only as a moving outline. The town calls doctors. Doctors make rounds, moving from house to house, listening to lungs that wheeze and crackle. They see the same pattern. People with asthma struggle. People with heart disease struggle. People with chronic bronchitis struggle. But then adults who have never been hospitalized begin to struggle too. In a drugstore, shelves of cough syrup empty fast. In a hospital, beds fill. Nurses stack damp towels near doorways, hoping moisture will keep dust down. It does not help. The problem is not dust alone. The problem is a chemical stew trapped in a bowl. The smell gets worse. It clings to clothing and hair. It seeps into rooms and into bed sheets. Food tastes off. Coffee tastes off. Even water feels like it carries a faint edge of something sharp. In the zinc works, the stacks keep releasing fumes. In the steel and wire plant, production continues. Workers are adults, hardened by routine and by the need for wages. Some work with headaches. Some work dizzy. Some leave early and are told they cannot keep doing that. The town runs on paychecks, and the mills run on the town. By the third day, people begin to understand that this is not normal fog. An ambulance passes slowly, headlights on, siren muffled by the blanket. A neighbor hears it, and another ambulance later, and then another. A doctor asks for oxygen cylinders. A nurse asks for more masks. Someone calls the Red Cross. The Red Cross arrives with nurses and supplies. They set up a station. and they move through the town, helping adults who cannot breathe. Oxygen becomes the most valuable thing in Donora. A mask over the face turns panic into temporary calm. Then the cylinder empties, and the need returns. The air hurts. That is the simplest way to say it. It burns eyes. It tightens throats. It makes the chest feel smaller. A person can sense the body fighting. A person can sense the heart working harder just to move blood through lungs that are struggling to exchange oxygen. Some adults die, not in a dramatic crowd scene, in bedrooms, in kitchens, in quiet rooms where a family watches and can do little. Death certificates list asthma, heart failure, bronchitis. But the timing is not coincidence. The timing is the story. Outside the valley, people hear rumors. Inside the valley, people feel the truth every time they inhale. The question is not whether the air is dangerous. The question is how long the weather will hold the lid in place. The weather holds. Day after day, the inversion stays. The river moves quietly under the haze, indifferent. The hills do not move. The stacks do not stop. The town keeps coughing. There is no single official warning system that tells Donora what is happening. There is no air quality index on the radio. There are no emergency texts. There are only eyes, throats, lungs, and the growing line at the hospital. Some local officials consider evacuation, but evacuation is not simple. Where do you send a whole town on short notice? How do you move the sick? How do you convince people to leave jobs, homes, and pets when they have lived through harder things? So people stay. They close windows. They hang wet sheets. They wait for wind. The wind does not come. Rain does. When the rain finally arrives, it changes everything in hours. The lid breaks. The air begins to clear. People step outside and see distance again. They take a deep breath and realize how shallow their breathing had become. Some feel immediate relief. Some feel exhausted, as if they have been fighting for days, because they have. The clearing does not erase the damage. Doctors continue to see patients. Coughs linger. Chest pain lingers. Weakness lingers. In some adults, the event becomes a before and after. Before the fog, they walked without thinking. After the fog, they measure each breath. News coverage spreads the story beyond Pennsylvania. A small mill town becomes a national warning. Pictures show a main street swallowed by haze. Descriptions talk about choking fog. People elsewhere read it and imagine London or Pittsburgh or any industrial city and wonder if the same thing could happen there. Scientists and public health officials arrive. They want facts, not rumors. They survey households. They collect medical histories. They count symptoms. They map where sickness was worst. They examine plant operations. They study weather conditions and the inversion that trapped pollutants close to the ground. The United States Public Health Service produces a preliminary report. It documents deaths and illness during the episode. It describes the relationship between the stagnant weather and the industrial emissions. It also shows how many residents became ill in only a few days. A disaster does not need to last long to leave a mark. The investigation identifies likely pollutants, including sulfur dioxide and fluorides, mixed with particulates and fog. The exact cocktail is difficult to measure after the fact because the event has already ended, but the pattern is unmistakable. A valley, heavy industry, and weather that shuts the door. Then people who cannot breathe. The mills respond with a familiar defense. They talk about unusual weather. They talk about natural conditions. They avoid admitting responsibility. This is not only a fight over blame, it is a fight over economics. The mills provide jobs. The mills are the reason many families are in Donora. The mills also fill the air with chemicals. Both truths exist at the same time. Lawsuits follow. Some families seek damages. Settlements occur. The money does not restore lost health. It does not restore a life. It does not restore trust. In a clinic office, a doctor sits at a desk with a lamp and a stack of cards. Each card holds a name, an address, and a list of symptoms. The doctor writes the same words again and again. Shortness of breath, cough, chest tightness, nausea. The repetition is the proof. This is not one patient with a rare condition. This is a population exposed to the same air. A pharmacist keeps the door closed between customers. When it opens, fog slides into the room as if it has weight. The pharmacist can see the particles in the light beam, drifting slowly, then settling. A woman asks for something that will stop the burning in her throat. The pharmacist hands over lozenges and knows they will not touch the cause. On the river, barges move through haze that hides the shoreline. A whistle sounds, then sounds again, because the first sound does not carry. The fog swallows distance and sound together. When investigators arrive, they ask simple questions. How often do the stacks release fumes? What controls exist? What happens during calm weather? They ask for records. They ask for production logs. They ask for maintenance notes. The answers arrive slowly, because the mills were not built to be transparent. They were built to produce. A weather observer explains the lid in plain terms. Cold air slides into the valley at night and settles near the ground. Warm air above acts like a ceiling without wind. The valley becomes a closed room. Everything released into that room stays. Hour after hour, the concentration rises. The ceiling does not look like anything. It is invisible, and that is why it is so dangerous. The deeper consequence happens slowly. Donora becomes evidence in a national argument. If a town can be nearly suffocated by industrial pollution in a matter of days, then pollution is not just an annoyance. It is a lethal exposure. The scientific work after Donora helps shape the emerging field of air pollution research. Public health agencies begin to treat air as a factor in disease, not only as background. Engineers begin to talk about controls and monitoring. Meteorologists talk about inversions and stagnant air episodes. The disaster becomes a case study, cited in reports, lectures, and policy discussions. Years later, federal attention increases. Early federal laws on air pollution begin to appear. They are limited at first. They focus on research and assistance. They do not immediately force industry to change. But they signal that air is now part of public responsibility. Decades after Donora, the United States builds stronger national air pollution laws. Standards become clearer. Monitoring networks expand. Enforcement becomes real. People argue about costs and about government power and about what industry should be allowed to do. Under those arguments sits a simple memory. A town once could not breathe. The human memory in Donora is even simpler. It is a memory of opening a door and finding the outside impossible. It is a memory of a street light glowing at midday. It is a memory of a neighbor asking for help and sounding like they are drowning on land. It is a memory of oxygen masks and tired nurses. It is a memory of waiting for rain like waiting for rescue. There is also a memory of how quickly normal life returned on the surface. The fog cleared and people went back to work. The mills kept running for years. Bills still had to be paid. People still needed food. A disaster can be visible and still become unspeakable because speaking about it threatens the idea that the town is safe. Today, Donora has a museum that remembers the smog. It is small, but it carries the weight of a turning point. Visitors see photos and documents. They see how public health investigations were conducted. They see how a local tragedy became part of national policy. The lesson of Donora is not subtle. Air is not empty. Air is a medium that can carry harm. When emissions accumulate and weather traps them, the body becomes a sensor. The body begins to fail first, before any official warning arrives. The ignored warning in this story is not a single sentence. It is a pattern that industrial towns accepted for decades. Smoke meant work. Haze meant pay. Coughing meant you live near a mill. People adapted, and adaptation became silence. Donora broke that silence. Not because anyone planned to, but because the valley weather turned the usual pollution into a concentrated exposure. The town did not get a warning siren. The town got a chemical fog and a rising death count. The open question is what happens when the next valley fills, or when the next city sits under stagnant air and people assume it will lift by morning. Will anyone treat the first cough as a signal, or will they wait for the air itself to become the emergency, to become the emergency, to become the emergency?